everybody. Welcome to another episode of Politically Depressed. As always, I'm your host, Eamon McAdam. You might notice that the sound is a bit different in this episode, and that might be for two reasons. One, I'm in Belgium again, and so I'm in a different room, and so you might be picking up those reverberations. And the second reason, this is going to be continuous even when I go back to Vienna. It's hot. It's summer, and so I'm going to be having a fan on, which I hope, it's like a constant noise, so I should be able to get rid of it. But I just wanted to mention that before I start today's episode, in case you notice anything different, I'll probably be the only one noticing and no one else cares, but I just wanted to mention. So, yeah, I watched the debate last night. The so-called debate. It was ridiculous. It was absurd. It's so upsetting. I think it's very revealing, though. Not necessarily revealing anything that we didn't already know, but it's a good sort of opportunity to talk about the things that are very obvious. And yeah, I'm going to talk about that a bit, but not that much, honestly, because I don't care. I think there's so much wrapped up in the theatrics. But before that, small announcement. For those listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, this podcast is now officially part of a new channel called From the Periphery. And we're basically moving our operations to Apple Podcast. And through that, you can become a member or a subscriber to the channel, which is kind of like a different version of Patreon, but it's more directly linked, to your app, to the podcast. And the main thing from my end that you'll get as a subscriber is access to Keep This Between Us, my new sub-series, which at the moment, by the time I release this episode, should have 9-10 episodes. I'm going to release an episode every week. It's always just stories that are a bit funny, thematic, whatever. So if you enjoy listening to my voice, if you enjoy the stories that I tell, you can become a member of our Apple Podcast channel, as well as support us financially so that we can continue doing this work, and especially I can continue doing this because, my God, the vindication of being paid to talk, if I can get this to that point, it's just not in a spiteful way, but just the nicest way of getting back at my parents for the years that they told me, I talk too much, or I don't know, there's all these phrases, bella falsafi, hajta hanak, don't really translate well into English, but they're all just ways of saying, just shut up and eat your dinner and leave us alone. And so what they didn't know was that I was developing conversational skills, oratory skills that I hope will pay off. It has in many ways, but to get it sustainable, I need your help. And so, yeah, that's the end of that long-winded announcement. So, before I get into the main topic, which is the presidential debate, but also the status of the American president as an institution, there are a few things that happened in this last week that's been fucked. There's a lot, but the main ones that I'll focus on are these two stories of dogs, of, let's call them Zionist indoctrinated dogs, or war-trained dogs, because it's got nothing to do with them. Dogs do not naturally do this stuff, but only the sickest and cruelest of minds creates a dog that, So there's a footage that was leaked to Al Jazeera that they got access to of a camera on the back of a dog, which was unleashed onto an elderly woman in, I believe, Jabalia camp, a refugee camp in Gaza. And the footage is fucking horrible. And just trying to imagine yourself in the place of that woman, it's so intensely dystopic and fucked. It's, again, another one of these images and footages that, we thought we'd seen it all. But someone did describe Israeli war tactics as being so intentionally cruel so that it becomes unbelievable. For anyone who's not already plugged in, I found myself once in a protest, this Zionist guy was yelling at us, and some person from within the protest was yelling at them what the Israelis are doing. But it just sounded so intense, like farcical, Like even the fact that, my God, 10 children a day in Gaza lose a limb from bombing. Like, that's one of these things that you hear and you're like, no, that can't be real. Or that they're using drones, quadcopters, to mimic the sound of crying children, of babies, to lure people out of their homes so that they can kill them. Like, this is beyond the kind of Hollywood imaginary of evil. And I don't know, maybe it is intentional so that they get away with these things. I mean, they get away with it anyway. Hopefully not. Again, that's one of those points that I don't want to just resign myself to this inevitability of a lack of accountability. Anyway, another major thing is the escalation in Lebanon and this constant daily signaling of escalation and de-escalation. It's mind-boggling. It's really fucked up. I feel so worried for my people. And so like Germany and Canada and the Netherlands and a bunch of countries called for their citizens to leave. Canada apparently is like actually investing money to pull their citizens out. But at the same time, we have so many signals that, not the Israelis don't want to invade. That there's a lot of political pressure, that this is all signaling towards negotiations and like positioning each other in a certain place for negotiations. I don't know. It's incredibly fucked. I still can't believe that a war might happen. Like, I'm still holding on to some of this analysis wherein it's like, it'll be so devastating for the Israelis that not even they, in their like moment of fucking mania, genocidal mania, would do this. But yeah, about a week ago, I think last Saturday or Sunday, the Telegraph, a British newspaper, I don't know if people have seen this. I don't know if I'd mentioned this in the last episode. I don't think so. But they came out with a story completely unsourced, there's not even a writer. Like, there's no declared writer, not even foreign policy team. It's just some bullshit thing that they shat out that says that Hezbollah storing weapons in the airport. And clearly, it just within the context of everything, knowing what the Israelis have done on far flimsier, like on zero justification, but is very clearly justifying a potential attack on the airport. And the thing is, Israel doesn't need an excuse to attack our airport. They've done it so many times before. Every Lebanese person knows that the first thing that'll happen if the Israelis do actually do an all-out aggression on Lebanon is they'll attack the airport. It is our sole international airport, one of the major pieces of infrastructure of the country, possibly the most important piece of infrastructure, our connection to the outside world, essentially, for a country that is so struggling economically, the ability for people and goods to come and go. I mean, aside from the port, but I mean, the port was fucking destroyed 3 years ago. Fucking hell, it's almost 4 years ago. Anyway, so that's been really fun and incredibly fucked, and is just a form of psychological torture that can't be separated from the rest of it. And I will point this out because I think this doesn't get sort of disseminated in the same way that you've probably heard about the Daily Telegraph article, but there are a lot of channels and news organizations in Lebanon that are kind of parroting what the Telegraph said or kind of expanding upon it. And this is disgusting. This is morbid. That at a time of like national crisis, not just economic and political and whatever, but like in the face of a possible war with this genocidal, fascist, imperialist state to our south, there are still political entities in the country that use this opportunity to still play the same kind of political cards, as in they are opposed to Hezbollah And so see this as a moment to be like, see? But it's absolutely upsetting. It's so incredibly... And I mean, again, I've talked a bit about the history. I've talked a bit about like these political structures. Like some of them are very aligned to Israel, much more so than to whatever Hezbollah presents, which again has been like fucked and disastrous. Except it's not like they're presenting a totally new thing. They are just protecting the thing that's already existed for the last 20 years. They are the protectors of the sectarian system in Lebanon, and kind of took over that role after the Syrians were kicked out in 2005. Anyway, I got pretty deep into Lebanese history there. I don't mean to every time. I do want to talk more about it because I think it isn't clear. It is not. It's a very complicated thing. Seeing things from the perspective of Lebanon always problematizes things. It's just not as clear cut. Lebanon is a place where all these factors come and collide, and the contradictions are just so ever present. And yeah, sometimes I forget that when I say something that it's a tiny piece of shit country that is so obscure. I don't know, I think it's obviously important, not just because it's my home and it's homes to like 4, 5, 6 million people, but as in, I don't know, it complicates any narrative that anybody has of geopolitics, which is great, but also... Sorry, I'm rambling. I'm going to do more episodes on Lebanon for sure, to preempt all the bullshit that's going to come out if a war is to break out, and all these really fucked up opportunists that are going to come in and be like, what's really happening in Lebanon? Your Rania Khalis, your Max Blumenthal's, your Richard Medhurst's. The list is long. Anyway, so on to the main topic, the presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump for the presidency of the world's largest economy, largest military, for the crumbling world hegemon, was a disaster. I mean, there's no good person on the stage, not just between Biden and Trump, but even the presenters, incredible propagandists. And it was really painful to watch. It was also, there's zero fact checking, and it's not just Donald Trump doing his Trump stuff. Even Joe Biden just says random bullshit. I mean, the main takeaway of this thing is that, like, fuck Trump. He is as fascist as it can get, and who he's aligned with, like in the US and abroad, are just, Netanyahu is so clearly gimping Biden, like publicly, because he wants Trump. He wants another Trump presidency. The Saudis clearly want another Trump presidency. The UAE, like, all the worst. I don't know. In a time of genocide, like Biden's genocide, essentially, it's very hard to be looking at the other person, to be looking at Trump and be like, to list his faults. I mean, whatever. But so, the world cannot handle either president, but much more so Trump. I don't know what to say. But so the main takeaway of this debate was, Jesus Christ, Joe Biden is on the throes of death. He can't speak. He's so fumbling. He just can't really make a sentence together. And he sort of has this, very visible limitations. Like, he's trying to say sentence, but then he's like, oh, he has to slow down, and then he has to take a lot. It's sad. He's an old, decrepit man. I don't feel sad for him because he's a genocidal piece of shit who is like at the helm of the world's foremost imperialist capitalist power. But you can't help but be like, Jesus, lay down, I don't know. I think of my grandfather, who's actually older than Joe Biden. Yes, they do make people older than Joe Biden. but he's been ill for a few years, and like, he struggles to speak, and it's sad. And the very last thing I would ever think was like, hey, have you ever considered running for the president of the United States? Like, my God, here's a man who made Donald Trump seem coherent, which is ridiculous. Because, like, Donald Trump, if you listen to what he says and you try to if you see it as text, it's always ridiculous, right? But he's saying words, he's saying sentences, he's making points, he's a bit coherent. Again, not valid points, but points. Even the way he holds his face. I mean, Joe Biden, this thing about last night was like how scared and confused he'd look. And you could see him thinking to himself, like, you need to look angry at what Trump's about to say. I don't know. Again, I don't want to spend that long like dissecting this as though anything actually happened. Clearly, for the kind of like Democratic establishment, this was the point in which, I mean, they're kind of freaking out. There's like panic mode. Apparently, the CNN post-debate discussion was like full on, no spin. Just like, holy shit, we need another candidate. This is not going to work. But for the rest of us who are kind of more tapped into reality and not so indoctrinated within this like liberal imaginary, we've been saying this for years. Joe Biden, all these people, they're like 80 something years old. They are not fit to serve, but they are also just not fit to be at the helm. I mean, okay, I'll slow down a bit. Within this liberal imaginary, he's not fit to serve. He is not fit to be the president of the United States at a time when the world needs incredibly powerful and direct leadership, especially in the face of like existential crisis. I'm talking climate. I'm also talking about nuclear war. Like, this is the decade that's going to decide the fate of the entire fucking planet. And we are almost halfway into it. And watching this debate between these two, one of them is going to be president, disgusting, terrifying, breathtakingly banal. But anyway, I'm going to take a step back because I think there is so much of this language that I don't want to fall prey to, So I think for me, the main takeaway of this debate that again synthesizes so many of the things we've been saying and so many people have been saying over the last, years even, but especially the last few months, which is, who is at the helm of the US empire? Like, who is directing things? Who's making decisions? Where does actual power lie? And I think watching Joe Biden speak for an hour, again, this is clear before, but he is not altogether there at all. He can barely put a sentence together. And how is he running the country, the empire? And I think the answer is he's not. I think one of the more crucial aspects of the last 15 years of American politics, genuinely starting with Obama, but more so like the origins are with Reagan, is that power really does not lie within the sort of traditional understandings of power. As in, he is definitely not the most powerful person in the United States. He's not the most powerful person in the world. He is probably not even the most powerful person in his own cabinet. But he is also not the leading figure. Like, what does he stand for? What is Bidenomics, if we can describe that? It doesn't exist. And I think Obama's presidency was a turning point for capital, for private interests, right? I think one thing that's incredibly clear is how much power private individuals have, companies, corporations, and other governments, other states, that this is something that people have predicted for a long time, which is the inevitability of the collapse of American hegemony. And what rises from that collapse is a lot of smaller powers, the rise of something like Turkey with Erdogan, or Saudi Arabia, or even Iran, but, regional powers that kind of contest the US hegemony, even if they're allied, and have their own interests. And they've really been running the show in a lot of ways. But the US president, I mean, it's an executive system, sure, but it doesn't actually have that much power compared to, like, the Senate, compared to the Supreme Court. Like, there are institutions, and especially then at the state level, Jesus, like, trying to understand the American system is so ridiculous because it's, like, such a massive country as well. But anyway, I mean, this is very basic analysis, right? This is like my intro to leftism with Noam Chomsky, where he's like, there isn't really a two-party system. There are just two different sides of the business class. And it's true. And you can vote this way or that way, but you can't vote away capitalism, right? There is no capitalism on the ballot. There is no imperialism on the ballot, or no white supremacy. And I don't like throwing around the word revolution because it's all hunky-dory, but then, like, how, where, with who, and the systems that exist make it so difficult to even do anything except work and take care of yourself, let alone organize a sustainable movement that can usurp the powers that be. But it really is a matter of, like, just global survival. Like, it's, I don't know, I don't like getting so dogmatic or, like, into these things. I remember I was recently traveling and I was stuck in Cologne, like in the train station in Cologne, and I overheard two people making small talk, and one person said, like, oh, I wish they had AC in here, it's so hot. And I remember thinking, I mean, I've been so on edge these days, especially around white people, and I have so much that I want to say, but I don't want to sound like just a lunatic yelling at people, you know what I mean? So I remember thinking in my head, it's going to get far worse, buddy. You better get your shit together and, like, force your government and your companies. And then I stopped myself there because, again, so I'm, like, thinking, force your government, okay, like, there's sort of attachments to power, like, he kind of has an ability to change rulers, voting, whatever, even that's bullshit, but regardless. But really, when we're talking about, like, who is producing, who is burning fossil fuels at record rates, who is selling and whatever, these are corporations, right? These aren't governments. I mean, speaking here in Belgium and whatever, but what ability does this guy have to change policies within corporations? And herein lies the thing, that actually, when thinking of private power, when thinking of corporations, none of us have an ability to change what they do and where they decide to spend their money or whatever. And this is precisely the core criticism of liberalism. Liberalism, for those that don't know, when I was growing up, when I was younger, it was a good word. You wanted to be a liberal because the opposite was a conservative, and that is bad. But as you grow older and discover leftism and discover socialism and all these other, like, lovely ensembles, liberalism becomes a bad word. And the core reason is, in my opinion, is liberalism is not just freedom of expression, of speech, of assembly. It is also freedom of capital, freedom of property. You own this factory. You own this gas field. You own this land. Therefore, you can do whatever you wish to it, and no one can tell you otherwise because this is a liberal, free country, so on and so forth. And that's why there were a lot of, liberals who were pro-slavery, because they saw these people, these humans, as property. And so you should be able to do what you wish with your property. It's disgusting, but it's existed for hundreds of years now, and the word has really shifted, and the connotations. And so now, when I say I hate liberals, people assume I'm a conservative, or when talking to Americans or people who are very into American media. But it's like, no, And the core reason is that, no, I don't believe that if someone owns land, they can do what they want with it. Or if they own, this is the sort of entryway into leftism, which is seizing the means of production, or being against private property as a structure, as a unit, as something that is you can't even debate it. Again, this is not on the ballot box. I think I'm rambling, actually. And I do apologize because I did just come from traveling yesterday and it was like a literal 15-hour journey because I insist going by train. And okay, so I'm going to try and wrap this up. Where was I going when I brought up liberalism? Now I remember. So our inability to actually affect what corporations do, what companies do, is precisely the problem we find ourselves in. Wherein, for economic interests, for financial gain, there are a handful of companies that are destroying the world. That is where democracy, there is no democracy there, and we do not live in a democracy because regardless of who you vote for, these people are the ones who have, incredible amounts of power, human civilization deciding amounts of power. And without being able to affect that, we really can't affect anything. And these are the people running the show. I'm not getting into a big conspiracy theory of lizard men, but clearly, watching this debate, Joe Biden is not running the empire. There is no one person running the empire. There never was, but there's not even anybody at the helm. It is just a very clear situation where the emperor has no clothes. And it's revealing exactly who is running everything, which is an assortment of capitalist, white supremacist structures called corporations, as well as regional powers that are benefiting from this collapse of American imperialism, of American hegemony, rather. And so that's what I learned from the debate. I mean, didn't learn, but it was just very obvious watching this. And I don't know, again, I apologize if I rambled on a bit too much, but I'm also laying down on my friend's bed, so I think I'm just staring at a blank wall as well. So I think I'm not fully in the mindset to be doing the best episode possible, but I have a commitment to doing an episode a week, and I want to continue doing that for the foreseeable future. And so, yeah, I think that's about it. This has been another episode of Politically Depressed. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please consider leaving a small donation in the tip jar below, or becoming a member of our Patreon or Apple Podcasts. And yeah, love and appreciate you all, and I'll see you all next time.